Mass Effect Andromeda set up one of the most interesting murder mysteries in the Mass Effect universe. And with no direct sequel or DLC in sight, I do think the upcoming game could address a few of Andromeda's unresolved questions. Beginning with, who is the mysterious Benefactor? Who is the person who funded the Andromeda Initiative? Who is behind Gian Garson's murder? And more importantly, why? And while there is a lot of speculation and no concrete answers, I wanted to deep dive into all of the possibilities, especially because this person originated from the timeline of the original trilogy. But first, as a little recap, let's go over the timeline of the initiative and how the Benefactor even became involved. Gian Garson founded the Andromeda Initiative in 1976. By this time, she was already a billionaire, and at the time it was founded, the initiative was intended as a way to expand exploration, discovery, and research. It wasn't originally intended to be the major project that it became. When Garson ran out of money during production, the mysterious and anonymous Benefactor stepped forward to save the project, knowing of Garson's situation, but with two major stipulations. First, 100,000 colonists on 5 arcs would be sent with the initiative, essentially changing the initiative's entire purpose. Each arc would contain 20,000 colonists comprising of all of the Milky Way galaxy races. The second stipulation was that Alec Ryder would be made the human Pathfinder. The Benefactor had already approached Alec Ryder about the Andromeda Initiative, even before Garson, and the Benefactor stipulated Alec Ryder's involvement as well as Sam to be continued on the initiative. Something important to note here is that the Benefactor's motivations seem altruistic. It seems like the Benefactor wanted to save and preserve the races of the Milky Way galaxy by providing them with a fresh start elsewhere. They were worried about the chaos and lack of resources should the Reaper War happen. They also wanted the project kept hidden so as not to cause panic, seemingly worried about the general public's response. They also wanted to help the research and development of Sam, to such lengths that they contacted Alec even before Garson knew of him. The stipulations requested by the Benefactor were essentially beneficial to all parties involved. So is the Benefactor a good person, an altruistic person, or is there some kind of sinister motivation for both of these stipulations? And why would the Benefactor, who is seemingly helping Garson accomplish her life's goal, want to kill her? We do actually have some semi-concrete information on the Benefactor and the identity. Someone on the BioWare social networks apparently data mined some game files with some very interesting information about the Benefactor. And we can see here it says that the character name is the mysterious Benefactor, and it indicates that the gender is female. The character description says, a character in the Alec Ryder memory flashbacks, this is the mysterious Benefactor, the secret backer of the entire Andromeda Initiative who originally hired Alec. She's a woman, though her face will remain hidden in this game and we'll only hear her voice. Race, human. Character type, major, and age range, about 45. Now this is just data mined info from Frosty Manager, and this could be referencing the feminine voice used when we see the Benefactor in Alec's memory, using the face scrambler and possibly voice changer. And this isn't the first BioWare game that has had files with important information, but it's interesting that the file says that the Benefactor is a woman, and seems like it's implying the voice we hear in the audio is the actual Benefactor's voice. And the voice does sound human, like the data mine files suggest. But I'd assume someone going to these lengths to protect their identity would also use a voice changer. The Benefactor's voice actress is Deborah Moore, and she also voices Catherine Nye, aka Knight, who is the leader of an anti-AI group, seemingly the very opposite of something our Benefactor would support. She can also die in this side quest, so I'd rule her out as the Benefactor anyways. Using voice actors for multiple roles is common, and Moore has one other random role listed as well. So it's not something I put much weight into, but it is worth mentioning. We also know that the Benefactor somehow knew that there was something coming, even before Shepard, and their fears were confirmed when Shepard encountered the Reapers in Mass Effect 1. This might be the most interesting thing we know about the Benefactor. And according to Mike Gamble, the Benefactor was intended to be a broader, overarching mystery, intentionally left vague for future exploration, which means that we can kind of assume the Benefactor was originally intended to be someone that is currently in the Andromeda galaxy. So that is everything that we actually know about the Benefactor. So let's look into the theories into who it could be, starting with the most suspected character, Foster Addison. Addison's story after the disappearance of Garson is extremely inconsistent and is actually also very suspicious, specifically during the 27 hours between the Nexus's initial arrival in Andromeda and when Garson's body is found. I made a timeline so you can see the events broken up by when they happen, and the teal colors are suspicious incidents related to Addison's whereabouts and responses when questioned. Nexus Uprising tells the events of the Nexus arriving in Andromeda and the chaos that ensues due to the Scourge hit. So let's break it down. The Nexus arrives in Andromeda after their 633-year journey. The Nexus then wakes up the Initiative's leadership and science team first. This is supposedly when Garson was woken up and made her way to the hidden room. It's important to note that this secret room was made during the Nexus's construction, so we can assume Garson was scared even during the construction phase of this project. During this, Foster Addison claims that she was with Garson and the entire science team right before the Scourge hit, but Sloane Kelly finds the entire science team and leadership dead due to the Scourge impact. This means Addison most likely wasn't with them. Sloane goes to look for Garson and instead finds Addison in Garson's chamber pod alone. When Sloane questions Addison on why she is there, she says she is looking for the restroom and then proceeds to tell Sloane that she was just with Garson and the science team and then left to go find Garson, but then stopped in the chamber pod to find the restroom, which Sloane immediately finds suspicious, and Addison's hesitation before answering is indeed suspicious. Why would she be looking for Garson if she was just with her? Addison tells Sloane she hit her head from the impact, and she does actually have cuts on her head and a head injury. So Sloane mostly chalks up Addison's weird and suspicious behavior due to her assumed concussion. The book does make a point of saying that Addison's cut is already starting to dry around the edges, which adds more suspicion to the timeline of events. When all of this is happening, Garson is in her room recording the messages she leaves right before she is murdered. Important to also note that where Garson's secret room is was closed off, and somehow the murderer was able to access it. Before Garson is found, Addison also almost immediately brings up the succession now that Garson is presumed dead. Meanwhile, the others are still hoping that she is alive. The rest of the team is still looking for Garson during all of this. But 27 hours after they were woken up, Garson's body is supposedly found in one of their makeshift morgues. Her body is charred and unrecognizable, and Sloane can't piece together any evidence of identity. It's also important to note that her body was found seemingly in a state of decay with a very strong smell, seemingly implying that by the time she was found, she had been dead for a while. What is also suspicious about this is that it is the two life support techs who identify Garson's body. They are quick to answer that it is her, that they found her while they were cleaning bodies, and that her wounds are consistent with all of the rest of the Scourge victims. The rest of the team doesn't argue this because her injuries were consistent with the Scourge impact, and her death isn't investigated anymore. In the novel Nexus Uprising, Addison's thoughts on the matter also aren't described, so we don't get an inside perspective into how she's thinking, despite the novel giving us everyone else's perspectives. Addison was the only remaining survivor of the science team that was woken up from Chamber 00, the same pod as Garson. And Addison doesn't actually seem like the type of powerful person to be the actual Benefactor. She's temperamental and suspicious, and I feel like if the actual Benefactor was on the Nexus, they'd have done everything to maintain their secret and avoid suspicion. I do think Addison is working for the Benefactor, though, by killing Garson. And this could also be the possibility for the two techs that were the ones who say they found her and were so quick to label her as another Scourge victim. We don't learn much of the techs' identities, but we do know that a ton of things, including cars and even people, were smuggled onto the Nexus and ARCs. So someone being there when they shouldn't seems like it would have been easy to do. So maybe they helped hide Garson's murder. There's also a mention of the janitor Chen being woken up alongside the Nexus leadership team, and how odd Sloan thinks this is. The janitor is panicked and seemed like he was also affected by the Scourge impact. Chen isn't acting suspiciously, but him being awake during this time seems odd. Maybe he was also involved in hiding Garson's death. Could Addison have covered up the murder to make it look like Garson was killed by the Scourge? Possibly with the help of the techs? And was this actually Garson's body? The novel makes it pretty clear that it is only suspected to be her body based on what the techs tell Sloane Kelly. There is no actual identifier. So maybe even she's still alive. Either way, I think Addison was involved. And next up, we have a theory that I see probably the most, and that is that the Elusive Man is the Benefactor. And this is probably the most popular theory, but it just doesn't make sense in both the timeline and motivations. First off, the Elusive Man died in 2186, a year after the Andromeda Initiative was launched. This means that he could not be in Andromeda. And Mike Gamble said that the Benefactor was set up to be important in the future, and the only way that I could see this working since the Elusive Man is dead is if Cora Harper, who shares his last name as Jack Harper, aka the Elusive Man, is revealed to be his daughter. We'll circle back to this later, but this is still a pretty far-fetched theory and doesn't really make sense motivation-wise. Because why would the Elusive Man, who was pro-human and anti-alien, want to fund the entire initiative? Especially when the Benefactor first started working with Garson and told her to add 100,000 colonists, 20,000 of each race, to the mission. We have also heard the Benefactor speak, and it sounds nothing like how the Elusive Man speaks. And why would the Elusive Man help Alec Ryder and his advancements of AI? The Elusive Man was indoctrinated. He was working for the Reapers. Why would the Reapers want the advancements of AI and to send all of these races to the Andromeda Galaxy, when the Reapers' entire purpose was harvesting the races of the Milky Way Galaxy? This would essentially mean that there would be less beings for them to harvest, and this goes against their motive. I just don't see the Elusive Man, who was the leader of Cerberus, a humanity-first organization, funding a project that was essentially about saving all the races of the Milky Way Galaxy. The Elusive Man also already had his own secret identity. He was the Elusive Man. Why would he need another alias? Going back to his motivations, the Elusive Man and Saren were both exposed to a Reaper artifact during the First Contact War, and while their indoctrinations developed differently, we know that the Elusive Man implanted himself with Reaper technology in Mass Effect 3 through the Cerberus logs, and this essentially finalized his indoctrination. The Elusive Man's motivations change from Mass Effect 2 to 3, where he is first acting on the advancement and preservation of humankind, but his godlike view of the humans warps into indirectly supporting the Reaper cause, on top of his indoctrination, and thus he is fully corrupted by Mass Effect 3. So while he had good intentions initially, his motivations became warped and he was working for the Reapers in the end. And you're probably thinking, but the Elusive Man wasn't fully indoctrinated during the development of the Andromeda Initiative. And this is true. But we also don't know exactly how his indoctrination progressed, especially when it seems like it had been gradually increasing for almost 30 years. Regardless, his anti-alien, pro-human stance had already been drilled into him at this point. We also know that during the timeline, which I've made a visual for, shows that the Lazarus Project is what the Elusive Man put all of his money into. Miranda even makes a comment about the depleting funds. We know that the Lazarus Project cost about 4 billion credits, and that was seemingly enough to put a major dent into the Elusive Man's funds. So how could the Elusive Man have also funded the Andromeda Initiative, which cost way more? It's estimated to have cost in the quintillion credits. So it doesn't make any sense for him to have been able to financially support both projects, especially when they were running concurrently. We also know that timeline-wise that the initiative was founded in 1976, and by 1985 the project was completed. So that means that sometime during that is when Garson went bankrupt, and then the Benefactor steps in to fund the initiative. And this doesn't make sense considering the Lazarus Project timeline. The Elusive Man was running out of money in 2185. So if this is the same year that the initiative was complete, all of the funds would have already been put into the initiative. Why would he not already be short on funds if he had been funding this massive project? Garson also mentions that the Benefactor had what seemed like unlimited funds. So this just doesn't sound like the Elusive Man. There is also another small, noteworthy thing in Mass Effect Andromeda, and personally I see this as just a fun Easter egg to the original trilogy, but some have seen it as hard proof of the Elusive Man's involvement with Alec Ryder. But you do find an SR2 model in Alec Ryder's room. Since this timeline would put this model before the SR2 was even out, it could mean that the Elusive Man gave an early unreleased copy of the final SR2 model before it was given to Shepard. Personally, I just can't see this as hard truth of anything. Ship models are a common thing in Mass Effect games, and this is most likely just a fun Easter egg that should have been the SR1, which would have fit the timeline better. There is one more relation to the Elusive Man that could be a possibility that I mentioned earlier, and this is actually a popular theory surrounding Cora Harper. Now, both Cora Harper and Jack Harper, aka the Elusive Man, share the last name. And the timeline could also line up with one major caveat. Cora Harper was born in 2159, and Jack Harper was involved in the First Contact War in 2157, 2 years earlier. This would have meant that the Elusive Man would have already begun his descent into indoctrination. By 2159, when Cora was born, he would have already established Cerberus as well. So I don't know if having a child would have been on his mind, but it doesn't rule it out as there's no solid concrete evidence leaning either way. When Cora talks about her parents, she says that she grew up on their cargo freighter in poverty, but doesn't go into details. She could be his daughter, she could have been adopted or only knew her birth mother. Maybe the Elusive Man didn't even know about her. On the opposite side of this, which I see speculation on a lot, she also could even be a sleeper agent who did a very good job of fooling everyone. And honestly, that could be a pretty interesting sequel. Maybe the Elusive Man did know of her existence, and that was the reason behind a lot of the opportunities she was presented with. Who knows? But do I think Cora was the Benefactor? Absolutely not. She was also on the Hyperion when the murder on the Nexus happened. Do I think it's weird that Cora and the Elusive Man share the same last name? Absolutely. While Andromeda's team was mostly new, Mike Gamble was on Mass Effect 3 and Andromeda as the game's producer. I can't see him not realizing the correlation. So accidental coincidence or intentional callback? Who knows? There is also speculation that Cerberus is behind the initiative, but there's several issues with this. First off, Jack Harper, aka the Elusive Man, founded Cerberus. What are the chances of this much money being funneled out of his own organization without him knowing? If there was some kind of shadow organization within Cerberus, how would that exist without him knowing? The Elusive Man had eyes everywhere and was in control of everything. There's no way that that much money was being stolen from his organization without his knowledge. I do think it's unrealistic that he didn't know about the Andromeda initiative though. With his extensive knowledge of everyone and everything going on, if he could find out Liara was the shadow broker, he would have known about the initiative. And we know that Cerberus knew about the Andromeda initiative because we find ex-Cerberus agents in Kadara. We find a message from the Elusive Man that these ex-agents were actually fired by the man himself because of their mind control AI experiments that they were doing against Miranda's orders. There's also an ex-Project Overlord Cerberus agent that we meet in Andromeda as well that I mentioned earlier, Catherine Nye, and this is the character who shares the voice actress with the Benefactor. But again, Nye is an anti-AI extremist, and her entire storyline is trying to destroy Sam, which is the exact opposite of what we know about the Benefactor. So the Cerberus agents we do meet in Andromeda do not align with what we know of our benefactor, or seem to have the funds or resources to fund the initiative either. But I do absolutely think we'll see Cerberus return, because Cerberus represents an idea that exists with or without Cerberus. Being pro-human, anti-alien is something that will probably always exist within the Mass Effect universe, and after the ending of Mass Effect 3 and the Elusive Man's death, there will be a power vacuum within this idea and the Cerberus organization, and I assume someone else will rise to the occasion. We've also already seen what looks like Cerberus colors, so it's definitely a possibility. I just don't see them having a connection to the initiative or see a reasonable way that they would have been able to fund this project without the support of the Elusive Man. Another popular suspect is Director Tan. His quick advancement in the ranks due to Garson's death immediately makes him suspicious, but in Nexus Uprising we actually learn he was still asleep in his pod when Garson was murdered. He was also reluctant to take such a high position of power when he was so low in the ranks, and would have no major motivation in eliminating so many people to get to Garson's position in the first place. Tan was 7th in line to succeed Garson's position. The lengths he would have had to have gone through to reach that goal would be ridiculous if he planned it out, versus this all being some freak scourge attack. The book also gives us his perspective and shows that he is not working from personal gain or a place of malice, only practicality. He also is in disbelief when he learns of Garson's death, and has a hard time accepting it. I do not think he was involved whatsoever. Now let's get into another very popular theory about who the benefactor could be, and one that I think actually makes the least sense, and that is that Liara is the benefactor. Now the majority of this theory revolves around Liara becoming the Shadow Broker before the initiative left, but the timeline just doesn't match. The initiative had been being funded secretly by the benefactor for years before Liara even knew the Shadow Broker's identity. Quintillions of credits were being moved and put into production during the many years of construction of the arcs for the entire project. It would not make sense for Liara to have been the benefactor because she only became the Shadow Broker about 5 months before the initiative's launch. We also know exactly what Liara was doing before she becomes the benefactor and after. I can't see any correlation for her involvement other than wanting to save the races of the Milky Way galaxy, but she was already doing that with Shepard. Either way, the timeline doesn't add up for this to even be a possibility. So she is ruled out, and no, I don't think this tweet is supposed to say benefactor. But could the benefactor have been the original Shadow Broker? We know that Alec Ryder reached out to the Shadow Broker looking for technology to finish Sam, specifically looking for code that the Shadow Broker tried to swindle him out of more money for. The Shadow Broker specifically doubles the price of the code and even threatens Alec Ryder over it. And this goes against how the benefactor behaved towards Alec Ryder when they approached him to help finish working on Sam. The benefactor specifically reached out to Alec Ryder before even Garson did, offering to pay for the funding of Sam's completion and the additional AI research that would be done on the initiative. This is the opposite of how the Shadow Broker approached the same subject. Another aspect of this is that we know the original Shadow Broker is dead. We killed him. And during the interview I mentioned earlier, Mike Gamble said the benefactor would be important to the future of the story. So I can't see the original Shadow Broker, who died before the initiative even left, being an important part of a story located in another galaxy 600 years into the future. We also know that the Shadow Broker before the Yogg we kill was also killed by that same Yogg. So both Shadow Brokers are dead. The only indicator that it could have been the Shadow Broker is that the Shadow Broker knew of the Reapers and even worked with the Collectors. I can't see the benefactor who is trying to save the races of the Milky Way galaxy from the Reapers to the point that they are evacuating the galaxy, also working with the Collectors. So I'm ruling out all 3 Shadow Brokers as well. There is also another popular theory that the Council was the one behind the Andromeda Initiative. So let's explore this. We do know that Alec Ryder spoke with Anita Goyle from his memories. And if you're not familiar with who Goyle is, she was the first human ambassador before Udina back before Mass Effect 1 took place. In the Mass Effect novel Revelation, it's revealed that the Human Alliance was actually already researching AI in the Skyllian Verge. This was back in 2165. Alec Ryder was posted on the Citadel roughly 5 years after this. Alec Ryder approaches Goyle about AI advancement, and while she seems open enough to listen to him, she also denies his request. Essentially, the story is that the Human Alliance was secretly researching AI in a small facility unknown to the Council on Sidon. Obviously, the Council even during this time was against AI research and development and proposes to inflict heavy penalties on the Human Alliance for breaking their AI laws. In good faith, Goyle reveals all of the documents and research from the facility to try to negotiate a better deal. What this means is that the Human Alliance was already secretly researching AI, and because of this being discovered, the Council also now has access to this information. Going back to Alec Ryder's memory, Goyle is acting pretty suspiciously, giving her assistant questionable side eyes. But what makes this meeting so interesting with Goyle is that Goyle supported this AI research that was being done, and even tried to convince the Council of its benefits, which is probably why Alec Ryder felt comfortable enough to approach her in the first place. Unfortunately, Alec Ryder's research on Sam is why he was dishonorably discharged from the Citadel and Alliance military. But in the novel Initiation, Sam's tech was stolen and he thinks it was Goyle. If Goyle really was the one who stole the Sam kernel, then she and probably the Alliance were still interested in AI research and development. In 2184, almost 20 years after Alec Ryder's meeting with Goyle, we learn that the Systems Alliance has been running a Black Ops facility, Quiet Eddie, that is specifically researching illegal AI for potential commercial applications, which makes sense considering it is military funded. But alongside the AI team on Quiet Eddie, there's also a team working on cybernetic integration, similar to Sam. This team stole the Sam kernel and immediately uses it on their AI that was operating Quiet Eddie, VI Medea. Medea was a poorly functioning prototype with a feminine build similar to Edie. After the installation of Sam, Medea goes crazy and becomes a literal murderous, anti-human monster. Once Alec Ryder finds out it was Quiet Eddie that stole the Sam kernel, Cora and her team bomb the facility, which ends the threat of the VI Medea. There's a subsequent trial involving the remaining scientist, but Alec Ryder acknowledges that the people truly responsible for Quiet Eddie will probably remain undiscovered regardless. So this leaves a major possibility. We know that the Human Military Alliance has secretly and illegally researched and developed AI for a number of years. We also know that they were able to get their hands on Sam a year before the departure of the initiative. And most importantly, we know that the people actually behind this were never revealed or tried for their crimes against the Council's AI laws. So this doesn't really reveal anything about the Council, but it does tell us a lot about the Human Alliance and their ongoing illegal research for AI, and more specifically, the lengths that they went to hide their AI development from the Council. The Humans Alliance could also be a possibility for the Benefactor if they could come up with the funds, but it does seem like they were behind in development. So maybe they decided to fund Alec Ryder's project instead of continuing their own, which in my opinion wouldn't make sense. A large military like the Systems Alliance would probably kill Alec Ryder and take the tech for themselves, which it seems like they've already tried to do, before they'd ever spend all those credits to fund his project. I can't see this being how they decide to continue their research if they couldn't directly use it and also be in control of its development. That just doesn't seem like how a secret military project would operate. Or maybe out in the open defying the Council was the perfect place to hide their research because the initiative was leaving the Milky Way. The Council had no control or say over their research, but I'm still willing to bet it's the former rather than the latter. So why would the Alliance even back this project? Maybe it was altruistic to truly save the races of the Milky Way galaxy. We know that the Alliance mostly supported Shepard in their crusade against the Reapers. And we know the Benefactor's major motivation was being saved from the Reapers. But if that was the case, why wouldn't the Human Council and Human Systems Alliance fund a project specifically for humans, especially when they were getting no support from the Council in their AI research and development? I think this is the major question that kind of breaks this theory, but there's definitely still more here leaning towards a possibility than not. So for now, the Human Alliance is a maybe. But this brings me to the actual Council. We know from everything I just mentioned that the Council was against AI and had been for quite some time, even before the initiative was founded. The actual Council knew of the Reapers but denied their existence, as we know from our experience with Shepard. But in Andromeda, we learn from Garrus's dad and Alec Ryder's memory that behind closed doors, the Council was somewhat acknowledging the things Shepard was telling them, and recognizing the threat that the Reapers presented. But in the end, it did end up being too late for them to properly prepare what forces they had, and we know that Thessia, Palaven, and Earth suffered greatly for this. So realistically, how could the Council have done such a terrible job of protecting the races of the Milky Way galaxy and their home planets, while simultaneously preparing for the worst possible scenario? The timeline here doesn't add up, considering that the initiative was in production at the same time the Reaper timeline was happening. We know that the Benefactor stepped in to help with funding sometime during 2176 and 2185, and it's safe to assume that it would have been during the second half of production when Garson would have run out of her own money, and thus needed the help of the Benefactor to step in to begin with. So if we say she ran out of money roughly around 2181, this would have been 2 years before Mass Effect 1 even takes place. So the Benefactor's motivation being that the Reapers were coming goes against the Council's motivations, because when the initiative was actively being built and when the Benefactor would have been actively funding it, it would have been when the Council was in denial about the Reapers' existence. Even still, the Council's general motivations would make sense if they were behind the project, considering their entire job is to protect the races of the Milky Way galaxy. And if they actually did believe in the Reapers and the impending doom, a failsafe to save the races, even if it meant leaving the galaxy, would make sense. But as I just mentioned, their motivations as we knew them and the timeline wouldn't have aligned with what we knew of the Council's opinions regarding the Reapers anyways. And could the Council fund the project? The initiative cost quintillions of credits, and right before the project would have been preparing to leave, the Council was in the middle of repairing not only the Citadel, but also their own homeworlds that had been destroyed. Wouldn't they have put their efforts into repairing what was happening in their own world, instead of using a massive amount of money investing in a project set for another galaxy? The motivations don't make sense, especially considering you can also kill the Council in Mass Effect 1, which would have set place during the initiative's funding. So if they were funding it, they would have been killed. Not to mention the Council members are still in the Milky Way galaxy. And again, we know that the Benefactor was set up to be important in the future. So I see it as a low chance of them actually being the Benefactor. And what would their reasoning be behind hiding their identity anyways? But since there isn't anything that specifically rules them out, the Council is a maybe, but probably not. Now, I've saved my favorite theory and the most complicated theory for last, and that is that an AI is behind the Benefactor. Possibly the Geth themselves or another AI of some sort, since we know there were other AIs being developed in the Milky Way galaxy. So let's look at why it could be an AI. First off, we know that the Andromeda Initiative project itself cost quintillions of credits, and that the Benefactor had seemingly unlimited funds according to Garson. This is the first major flag that this Benefactor could be generating money instead of actually having any. If an AI was able to basically punch in some numbers to get access to more money, that seems more likely than one person actually having this amount of money. And we know that even the Elusive Man had limits when it came to money. He essentially went bankrupt funding Project Lazarus, and that was only 4 billion credits. So who do we know in the Milky Way galaxy who could have actually funded this project with truly unlimited funds? None that we currently know of. Maybe the Shatter Broker, but as mentioned before, his motivations and timeline just don't align, especially considering his interactions with Alec Ryder. So realistically, we don't know one individual who would have this kind of money. That doesn't mean that they don't exist, but we just don't know of anyone, and this is a lot of money. It seems far more realistic that an AI messed with some code or numbers and came up with it. I don't know how money laundering works, but this seems feasible in a world where everything can be assumed to be digital by the year 2180 anyways. The next major red flag is why would the Benefactor go to such lengths to protect their identity? Using a scrambler for their face and most likely their voice is one thing, but to kill Gian Garson, the person who is behind the initiative, to begin with is another thing. Technically, we don't actually know the Benefactor's motivation behind Garson's death, so it could be more than just wanting to make sure she never found out who the Benefactor actually was, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a lot more to this. But from what we know now, it seems like Garson was becoming suspicious and was wanting to know who the Benefactor was, and the Benefactor didn't like this, hence why she ended up dead. And we also don't know if the figure in the AI recreation of the scene is the Benefactor or someone they hired. I'm assuming it is someone that was hired to kill Garson versus the actual Benefactor. And most importantly, we know that the Benefactor knew of an incoming threat even before Shepard encountered the Reapers in Mass Effect 1. And we know the Geth were the first to come in contact with the Reapers in this cycle around 2180, roughly 3 to 5 years before Shepard, and this would be a few years into the initiative's production timeline. Possibly when Garson ran out of money a few years after beginning the project in 2176. We also know the Geth did not actually want to war with both the Quarians and the other races of the Milky Way galaxy, and we know that not all Geth followed the Reapers. Majority of the Geth just wanted peace and to be able to live unburdened by the war. They were not the aggressors in the Morning War, and by aligning themselves with the Reaper, they were looking for a way to survive. Would the Geth go through such lengths to protect all the species of the Milky Way galaxy? Maybe if they were all like Legion, I'd find that plausible. But we know Legion was more advanced than the rest of the Geth, so the motivations behind the Geth being the Benefactor are questionable. Maybe the Geth wanted to understand and help synthetics as a way to be accepted in the Milky Way galaxy, but also knew the other races wouldn't accept their help from an AI, which is why they'd want to hide their identity. Maybe with their telescope, the Geth were able to uncover more information that we just don't know about the future of the Milky Way galaxy or the Andromeda galaxy. We also have to remember just what the Geth were capable of. If you're not familiar with the Geth telescope, I have a whole video on it, but essentially the Geth move 3 mass relays and join them together by some strange technology, possibly Reaper technology. The Geth were able to pull relays which are massive across systems to the Perseus Veil to construct the Kalos Array in secret. They then reverse engineered them to make an extremely powerful telescope that could look across galaxies in essentially real time. When we learn of it, we don't know how old it is or how it was made, only that it was pointed toward dark space. The discovery of the Geth telescope, aka the Kalos Array, by Shio Leth Vasnovara, is what gave the initiative the information to be able to finish their calculations to Andromeda. So there is some contradiction here. Because why would the Geth hide this information from the initiative if it could have helped them make this journey on the project that they hypothetically could have funded? That aspect doesn't make sense. Another issue with the AI Sam/Geth theory is that the Benefactor speaks in a very human way. The inflection in the voice is not something we've seen AI replicate. Edie is probably the closest to sounding the most human, but Sam and the Geth have a very robotic feel to the cadence of their voices. We at least haven't encountered any AI with this ability anyways. So maybe it wasn't the Geth, but it could have been an AI, for all the reasons I just mentioned. An AI would be able to generate unlimited funds, an AI would also want to hide their identity from humans because it is very clear across the Milky Way galaxy that AI and synthetics have not found a perfect harmony to live together. Something else kind of silly but still worth mentioning is a coincidence that the Andromeda Initiative's initials are AI. Probably a coincidence, but you never know. Related to this AI theory, I haven't actually seen this theory, but it ties into this AI concept. And it is far-fetched, but within the Mass Effect universe, there are virtual aliens. They are a race of roughly 1 billion individuals who downloaded their minds into a virtual world aboard a starship after their homeworld star was about to go supernova, roughly 8,000 years ago, to avoid the destruction of their civilization. As of 2185, the virtual aliens have established a diplomatic relationship with the Council to secure a new power source for the systems that maintain their virtual world. These virtual aliens are capable of swapping consciousness with other sentient beings and can also control their bodies. In 2185, when the virtual alien starship entered Solarian space looking for help, the Council hesitated due to their views of AI, but a deal was established that the Council would help the virtual aliens to maintain their starship if they traded their advanced technology. All the information around this exchange have been classified as top secret, but we do learn that Dr. Detweiler, who was the liaison between the virtual aliens and the Council, was being controlled by the virtual aliens ambassador, Ambassador Saigon, to communicate with the Council. Some space magic happened, and Saigon and 400 virtual aliens swap places with various races to leave their virtual world and join ours. You'd think that if these virtual aliens were capable of all of this, that they could easily create the necessary funds to fund the initiative. And maybe they'd been involved somehow even before approaching the Council for help. It's a big stretch, but this would be a very cool way to introduce a new race that was mentioned in Mass Effect 3, while also exploring more AI. We encounter multiple AI through the series, and I could see an AI like Legion or Edie, who had a surface-level understanding about sentient life, but also had a genuine curiosity and love for humanity and the races of the Milky Way galaxy, finding a way to save the races if they could. Maybe even Sam, who was being created for the sole purpose of saving Ellen Ryder's life, grew intelligent enough to want to help all life. This one is a bit more far-fetched considering the timeline of events, but Sam being the Benefactor is another popular theory. By the time the Benefactor contacted Alec Ryder, Sam was partially completed, but not fully finished. Maybe Sam saw a way to help his own mission, which was to save Ellen Ryder, even if it meant this entire grand plan. Maybe this even factored into Sam's own self-preservation, knowing all of Alec Ryder's experience with AI and the possibility of more people finding out about Sam's existence meant that Sam could be destroyed. Sam would also have had access to Alec Ryder's memories and experiences. And if Sam knew of Garson's suspicions and her wanting to find out more about who the Benefactor was, if Sam was the Benefactor, Sam would have wanted Garson's questioning put to an end. Sam also has the ability to bring people on board under hidden false names. So Sam committing any kind of questionable activities would have been child's play for him, especially with access to unlimited funds and the ability to generate multiple faces and voices to disguise Sam's true identity. Sam doesn't really seem like a murderer, but he does have some very interesting and random dialogues that are kind of suspicious, talking about the beginning of something but not elaborating. And while this is another far-fetched theory, Sam would have had access to all the technology to smuggle people on board, to create a fake identity, and if he is advancing in his AI, would also fight for self-preservation. Now, Sam maybe wouldn't have had known about the Reaper's impending attack, unless Sam had been secretly accessing files related to Shepard's report, which could be a possibility. But Sam still wouldn't have been able to create the Benefactor's voice in such a human way. So I think there are definitely flaws in this theory. So for now, it's a maybe, but probably not. I have also seen some theories around Reyes Vidal, and I think realistically he could be capable of killing Garson if hired to do so. but his motivations behind being the benefactor just don't make sense. Sure, Cerberus agents are operating under his territory, and his little gang called the Collective sounds suspicious as hell, but I think he is more self-serving and likes to work alone. I couldn't find the tweets, but apparently his writer Courtney Woods confirmed that Reyes arrived in Andromeda and was awake before the events of the Nexus Uprising, but I couldn't confirm his exact location during the events of Garson's murder. He's also not mentioned at all during the novel, but his personality and background fits with someone who would have no problem being a hired hitman. But he can also die. So I'm ruling him out as a benefactor, but a maybe for being affiliated with the benefactor and maybe being a hired hitman. Let's also look at some semi-popular theories that I don't really feel like going into deep dives on because I just don't think they hold much weight. And the first one is Lexi DePero, the resident Andromeda doctor. Majority of this theory surrounds the fact that she is not romanceable and that she is trying to investigate you, and there's really not much more than that. I think that this was more of BioWare trying to avoid a doctor-patient trope, rather than it being the motivation behind a secret identity. DePero was also not on the Nexus during Garson's death, but was still on the Hyperion asleep. So yeah, not much weight here. Another theory I actually see kind of often is about the Volus billionaire Kuman Shoal. Shoal claims that a vision of a higher being told him to seek the lost crypts of beings of light on the planet Clencori. These entities were supposedly created at the dawn of time to protect organic life from synthetic machine devils, which is referring to the Reapers. Shoal has been excavating on Clencori's toxic surface for 2 decades, putting all of his money into this venture. We find some text about him from a survey that says scans of the planet Clencori reveal the cockpit of a Volus trading vessel. There are no signs of the rest of the ship, but the salvage team discovered one of the matriarch Dillinaga's writing on his ship. There really isn't much to him in game, but his obsession with the Reapers is probably keeping him in the Milky Way galaxy, obsessively excavating Clencori. He was also only a billionaire. The initiative is known to have cost in the quintillions, so he's ruled out. I also want to bring up these Andromeda data pads that also mention a benefactor. These are found in the Ket Exaltation facility on Vold, and I think contextually it doesn't align with what we know of our benefactor, but seems like the brainwash Angara is thanking their own personal benefactor. It reads, "Benefactor, I hear that you're having good success in questionable EOS. My transfer to this place was a good idea. There's so much to learn. I'm grateful you suggested it. Let's meet again. Perhaps you would be interested to see my homeworld like you once showed me yours. In harmony, Hizich? Unless, and this is a tinfoil hat theory, unless the initiative was actually used as a way to harvest different races and then bring them to Andromeda for exaltation. But this doesn't really add up when you account for both how far-fetched that is and also that the Ket would not have been able to view the Milky Way galaxy with the thriving races as we know, as they would only see the things roughly 2 million years in the past. But why would BioWare use the title Benefactor here if it wasn't referring to the one and only? Seems like a weird coincidence, and it's hard to just chalk it up to just coincidence anyways. First Cora and Jack Harper, and now 2 benefactors? Maybe our benefactor actually was someone working with the Ket, because the comment about the homeworld is hard to look past. It seems like the Ket saw the benefactor's homeworld, which would be an extremely interesting interaction to know more about if it was our benefactor. But I do lean more towards this being an Angara to Ket interaction. Maybe this is just a red herring and BioWare put it in here to throw us off. Maybe BioWare hadn't actually decided who the benefactor was during development and is left as a question to answer as the future. Realistically, this is what I think it is. I think that there were roughly 600 people woken up when the Scourge hit, meaning there are a lot of possibilities behind who killed Gian Garson, and BioWare could slap a name and story onto any one of those people and have them be the benefactor. Or maybe the Benefactor stayed in the Milky Way galaxy and had Foster Addison kill Garson. But why would the Benefactor stay in the Milky Way galaxy after investing in such a massive project that would travel to Andromeda? So in conclusion, the Elusive Man, Cerberus, Liara, the previous 2 Shadow Brokers, Director Tan, the Volus billionaire, Cora Harper, Lexi Tapero, and William Spender, which was Addison's lackey, are ruled out. These are the people who are not the Benefactor because of timeline inconsistencies or because of motivations that don't make sense. They were also either asleep or not on the Nexus at the time of the murder. And then we have those that could be involved in Garson's murder, but are not the Benefactor. We have Foster Addison, who I think is the most likely candidate, Reyes Vidal, who could possibly be, and also the life support techs that found her body, and I think these are the most suspicious. And that leaves us with the remaining candidates that could possibly be the Benefactor. We have an unknown person, and I do think that this is the most likely scenario. We also have Anita Goyle, who stole the SAM kernel and was also suspicious, and the Human Systems Alliance, who is known to be researching and development AI behind the Council's back. And then we have AI for several reasons that I listed earlier. And then any one of the 600 Nexus colonists that were woken up during the Scourge impact. We also have Sam, which I think is unlikely, the Council, which I think is unlikely, and the Geth, which I think is unlikely, but are still possibilities. There's so many unanswered questions, and I actually think the Benefactor situation is a perfect way to connect the original trilogy and Andromeda. We have already been shown a ton of clues hinting to Andromeda in the trailer, teasers, and Gamble's tweets. And the Benefactor would have come from the Milky Way galaxy. Since there are so many unanswered questions around the identity, origin, and fate of the Benefactor and Garson's murderer, there are a lot of opportunities to bridge the gap between the 2 galaxies and make them feel more connected. If the next game takes place shortly after the ending of Mass Effect 3, which I think is a major possibility, then the Benefactor could still be in the Milky Way galaxy instead of being in the Andromeda galaxy, maybe using the Geth telescope to observe what is happening in Andromeda. I'd also argue that the mystery surrounding the Benefactor is Andromeda's most popular unanswered question. Even people who don't necessarily love Andromeda are still wanting to know who it was, since it has relevance to the original trilogy's timeline. And with a direct Andromeda sequel most likely out of the question, the possibilities for the Benefactor have most likely changed with the change in the direction of the series. So I hope we do get this answered in the next game. And if you're still here, thank you so much for watching this. I did a ton of research and tried to cover the most popular and realistic theories. Let me know who you think the Benefactor is in the comments and if you've heard these theories before. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more Mass Effect content. Thank you for watching.